Well, first of all, thank you for taking the time to talk with me today, joining Lessons from Learning Leaders. Justin, what I'm curious about, and the way we usually start these conversations is I want to hear your story. Like, tell me how you got where you're at today.
Yeah, it's an interesting story since I started life as a software engineer. And so, how do you go from being a software engineer to being a communication coach? That's an interesting path. But as I look back on it, I feel like the through line of everything was communication. So, I got a degree in mathematics, I was a software engineer. But when it came time to explain things to leaders, the other software engineers would always kind of nudge me to the front of the room and say, why don't you do the explaining? Why don't you give them the bad news? And eventually I said, okay, if this is how it's going to be, I decided to get a business degree. And that was all communication. I learned that was
Were
really
they
focus.
were they offering you up as tribute? Like you, yo, we offer Justin as tribute, or was it because they recognized that you had this innate ability to break down things in a way people understood?
Or was it because when it came time to volunteer, they were all much faster at stepping back and leaving me at the front? Um, I'd like to think it was because they knew I was an effective communicator. But also, when you're delivering hard, difficult messages, when projects aren't going to be delivered on time, when you're having to explain complex technical issues, yet nobody really wants to do that. Like that's not anybody's passion. And so the other software engineer said, Justin, you're good at it. Why don't you go do it? And maybe I was good at it. I certainly didn't like it more than anybody else. But like I said, as I started to really get into business, I realized it's all about communication. It's everything we do. Like you can have great results, you can have projects you're passionate about. People won't understand any of that without communication. It's so fundamental.
So one of the things I've read in the past, and I try to remember when I'm breaking things down is if you really understand something, you can explain it to a 5-year-old. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. The but it is a different way of thinking. The um let me talk about it this way. We have had written language for about half as long as we've had spoken language. And so, with the benefit of written language, we can do very complex, long form logical thinking, right? We can, it starts here, here's the next point, and you have to write all that down to understand it. And so, that's really complicated, expert level thinking. Before that, we had to be storytellers. We were sitting around the campfire as cavemen and trying to remember things, and we did it all with stories. And that sort of spoken story communication has been around twice as long. And so that's much more primal to the human experience. And so that's why everybody remembers it so much easier than they do a string of facts that get you to a logical conclusion. And so do I think you can really understand something without being able to tell a story? Absolutely. I meet those people all the time. I help them learn how to tell the story in addition to understanding the sequence of facts. I help experts communicate with non-experts.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So let me ask you this: so you've got a presentation coming up at Training Magazine, the Expert Trap: How Knowing Too Much Can Sabotage Your Training and Presentations. But you also had a book that came out not that long ago, Presentation Pitfalls. I'm I'm here on where to go first. I defer to you. Which would you prefer to talk about first?
Let's go with Training Mac. Let's start there because that started our relationship. I'll use a anecdote. Everybody has two voices in their head. They have the Mr. Spock, logical, sequential, data oriented voice, but they also have the Captain Kirk, that emotional storytelling voice as well.
Yeah.
And so the expert trap is only communicating with the Mr. Spock voice. And what you begin to realize is people prefer that you communicate with them using the Captain Kirk voice. Now, you do have to let Mr. Spock out a little bit. They don't just want a story, they want proof that you've done the expertise work, right? They want that level of confidence. So you start with a story, you let Mr. Spock out just a little bit, and then you end going back to the story. And that is how you really that's really how you convey information as an expert if you're not talking to other experts.
So you're talking about actually using storytelling as a way to begin the engagement so that later on you bring in the facts and what they need to know. You can be a little more logical. Is that what you're saying?
Well, they will give you, first of all, a lot more space to be logical because they feel like they already understand it. They've already heard the story. They've already agreed with you. They've already understood it. And so then as you start giving them the facts, all that does is it gives them the confidence. They're like, okay, not only can Justin explain it in a way that I can understand it, I see he's done his homework. He's done the other stuff. But you've got to be able to, like you said, you've got to be able to explain it like you do to a 5-year-old. Luckily, there's so many great tips and tricks. Like, you know, Dwayne, we're in the golden age of AI. The
Mhm.
large language models, one of the best things they've done is they're making life easier for experts to communicate. Because pick any topic, anything you're an expert at. Like, let's say it's podcasting. If you went into a large language model and you just put a bunch of the facts that you understand about podcasting in there and then said, give me 10 analogies for this. Now, notice what I did there. I said, give me some analogies. And so we're playing up to large language model strength, which is just making stuff up and connecting dots. And I also said, give me 10. And so you can look through them and pick the one that most resonates with you. And one of them is almost always going to be a rocket ship. I don't know why, but they think that is the magic analogy for everything is a rocket ship. I wouldn't choose the rocket ship, but maybe you're a sports guy and there's a great sports one in there. And then you say, oh, give me 3 more sports ones and actually also give me some real examples of where this happened to teams. And suddenly you'll be able to tell the story of your podcasting expertise, but in terms of the Bears Super Bowl run and all the like that's and before this before AI, you would have to spend hours trying to think of this on your own. With AI, you can do it so much faster.
You know, you remind me of a story that I have that when I was training for another nonprofit, I had to go to Alaska and I had to give a training on storytelling as a way of sales. And I asked the group, why should we tell stories? And this guy in the back of the room, I'll never forget this. This guy in the back of the room, he looks around. Nobody's answering, of course. I didn't know enough about training at that point to know you don't ask the whole room a question because there are very few people who are that courageous that want to say, "Oh, I'll say it." This guy looks around, and so I said again, "No, really, why should we tell stories?" And this guy says, "Because people buy with emotion and they justify with logic."
Mm, love it. Love it.
And yeah, me too. I was like, "Whoa, say that again." And he shared it with me again. And later on, I was reading a book on sales, and it's back there on one of my shelves. And this guy in there, he wrote, "People buy with almost like word for word. People buy with emotion, they justify with logic." And that's kind of what I think. That's essentially what you're saying here. You get that emotional engagement. They're more open to what it is you're trying to sell them or train them on.
We teach using one of the models we use is the success framework. And that's from the Heath brothers, their fantastic book, Made to Stick, one of their many bestsellers. And the success model says sticky stories should be simple, unexpected, credible, concrete, emotional, and it should be a story, right? It should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And one of the things I believe is we could come up with, we could create a new framework, we could reinvent all this stuff. But if somebody nailed it like the Heath brothers did, why should we reinvent it? And the good news is, you mentioned my book earlier. We reached out to the Heath brothers as we were writing the book and we said, hey, we're going to talk a little bit about storytelling. We love your success framework. Can we put it in the book? And by the way, our publisher wants you to sign all this paperwork that says it's okay that we put it in the book. Will you promise not to sue us? And the Heath brothers wrote back to us and they said, absolutely, you can put it in the book. We think that, I mean, they were so cool about it. They said, absolutely, you can put it in the book. We think books are how human knowledge is expanding, and we want to be able to empower other people to continue to add to it. They said, we won't sign any of your paperwork, but hopefully this email is good enough. And the publisher eventually said, yeah, the email was good enough. We didn't need to sign any of the paperwork. And so that's one of the frameworks we teach in the presentation pitfalls is that success framework. And to your point, emotion is one of those key elements. I don't know what it is about the business world that makes us believe that we shouldn't talk about emotion and we shouldn't use concrete storytelling, right? I, for some reason, we're natural storytellers on the weekends and at the dinner table, but we get into the office and Mr. Spock is the only one we allow to talk. And he is a terrible storyteller and it's all facts and data. And we've got to embrace that weekend storytelling when we're in the business office. Because to your point, that's how we make decisions. It's through emotion.
That's do you think that's because we worry about not being taken seriously? And so when you tell stories, you don't seem as serious as you feel you should. Is it too much TV on what the business world is like and you have to be very serious and confident? And I can't tell you this story. I in fact have to be very stern and direct and cold.
I like that. I definitely think that's part of it. As a communication professional, Dwayne, one of the interesting questions we ask ourselves is why is everybody afraid of public speaking? And if you think about it for a minute, you realize, okay, I understand why people are afraid of heights. Like that's dangerous. You're in a situation you could fall, you could hurt yourself, right? And I understand why a lot of people are afraid of spiders. Spiders can be dangerous. Not everybody's afraid of spiders, but spiders can be dangerous. You can understand where that comes from. But why are people afraid of public speaking, right? Why does our heart race? Why do we have that fight or flight response to public speaking? And as near as we can tell, or our best guess is, it goes back to a time when humans were in tribes. We're in tribes of usually about 150 to 200 people. And we relied on our tribe for survival. And if you got ostracized from your tribe, then that could mean the difference between life and death. And so public speaking was that important. It was how you showed you were aligned with the tribe. It was how you proposed new ideas. And so I think a little bit of this comes back into the business world. We're afraid of standing out. We see leaders telling stories, but we're not sure we have permission because all the best leaders were great storytellers, right? Steve Jobs, like these people were fantastic storytellers, but for some reason we're afraid of sticking out in the business world. Like you said, we're robots instead of embracing our natural storytelling.
I used to tell people President Reagan was called the great communicator, right? And he did a lot of radio before that. But you go back and you watch his speeches, and I did this deliberately. I was like, what made him so good? And he told story after story in his speeches. He's just out there telling stories to prove his point. And whether you like him, his policies or not, you have to respect the fact that he was able to communicate what he was doing effectively to the point where they labeled him the great communicator. And
Absolutely.
one thing I like, let's stick with the expert trap. At one point in my life, I remember reading an article about the fact that rocket scientists weren't being allowed to teach high school physics, and I thought that was just absurd. Of course, they can teach physics. They're rocket scientists. Who better than this? And now I realize how wrong I was. Why would it be bad to take someone out of like mission control and NASA and put them in a room with high schoolers to
Right.
teach them physics?
Right. To keep torturing the analogy, it would be all the Mr. Spock voice and none of the Captain Kirk. Although there are some few, I'm sure, physics PhDs who are really good at telling stories. The vast majority of them are going to focus on the expertise. And when you look at, I don't, have you been into a classroom recently do you have kids, Dwayne?
Yeah, I have 9 kids, but we homeschool them all, so
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, really great teachers. And probably when you're homeschooling the kids, it's about stories, it's about engagement, right? If you can't capture somebody's imagination, they're not going to learn any. And so, I my wife is a math professor at Case Western, and she was talking about some of the other teaching assistants that she's coaching, and she's having to teach them that lesson of it's about engagement, right? You can say all the right things, but if your class isn't nodding along, if your class isn't taking notes, if they're not asking questions, you're probably not getting your message across.
Yeah. Yeah. Solid point. I just I would think about all those poor and that poor SME would think they're just doing so great. And then they'd finish it and be like, I don't know why they don't get it. I
Right.
don't
We
I told
we
'em.
got all the data.
And then I don't know if you talk about this in your book in your presentation, but when working with SMEs in the past, everything they know is important.
Mm,
Everything needs to be in this. And a question that I've used, because when I'm designing training, I keep in mind the Six Disciplines of Breakthrough Learning, which is a great book. D1, what is the business objective? And so once you have the business objective, then you can say, okay, in order to accomplish this, what is it people need to be able to do? And then you get with the SME and they're like, here's everything I know. I've looked at them and said, okay, when in the course of doing this will that information be valuable?
mm.
And if they can't answer that, then we're like, okay, we'll just put that in the handout.
I love it. We when we're developing presentations, we teach a 4-part framework, and this is my business partner and I. And you should have John on the show sometime. He would love to talk to you about his perspective. But our 4-part framework is tell a clear story, leverage graphics, reduce noise, and present with confidence. And that reduce noise piece is so important for experts because you're right. They have 100 things that they learned on the path to becoming an expert. But when you present 10 facts, people are only going to remember 3 of them. So 7 of those were noise. 7 of those were distracting people from whatever the 3 most important facts are. And that's a big part of what we go through with experts is we go through the concept of signal to noise ratio. And then we really start taking out all the extraneous stuff. This is noise. Yes, it was important to you to get here. It's noise to your audience. Like, is this the one thing you want them to remember from this slide? No, it's noise. Let's get rid of it. Put it in the appendix. Put it in the handout. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can be tough to tell them that because they're like, no, it's really important. I'm like,
It
yeah.
was.
I feel like, Thor. Is it though? Is it? Yeah.
I like it. But it was important to them on their journey, absolutely. But your presentation, your training, it isn't a history lesson. Like that is the biggest mistake we see is that people say, hey, I started here. There was a complex problem and I did some analysis and then I realized I tried this answer. That was the wrong answer. And then I figured out here's the final answer and this is the right answer. Well, the problem with a history lesson is you don't get to the answer till the end. And if you run out of time, you never get to the answer. And the answer was the most important thing. That's got to come front and center. The military have a good framework. They call it BLUF, bottom line up front. Have you
Mhm.
heard that one before? Yeah. I mean, and that's an easy thing to do with an expert too, is to have them write everything down and then say, okay, we're going to flip this whole thing upside down and we're going to start with the bottom line. And then we're only going to go a couple lines down and then the rest of this goes in the appendix. And usually that's not a halfway bad answer, better than their first answer.
So have we covered everything from the presentation? I don't want to leave the book out.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I mean, we're good. And we also taught the book and one of our traps in the book is the expert trap. And that is what I'm going to be presenting on at Training Expo and conference. I hope we get a lot of your audience there. I'd love to go into more details, but we have 9 other traps that we put in the book and they're all fantastic. And we'll be focusing on the expert trap at the conference.
So I don't want to spoil anything, but do you mind just letting me know how do you define the expert trap?
That is when people focus on their expertise and not on what their audience needs to learn. And so their message never gets completely conveyed. And so they're like you said, they're having fun saying, here I'm an expert. Look, look at all the things I know. That's great. What really matters in communication is what does your audience learn, not what do you know. Your audience comes first.
One of the things that I've really tried to impress upon new trainers or trainers that I've worked with in the past, I had a 3-day master trainer course that I designed, and I said, here's the number one rule when it comes to facilitating or training or performance improvement or whatever you want to call it. The number one rule, write this down. It's not about you.
Love it.
Because
I
you
love
get
it.
so many people in there who are like, "Wait," that they're like I keep going back to superhero movies, but they're like the Joker, "When are they get a load of me?" I'm like, "It's not about you."
Exactly.
And that sounds like kinda what the expert trap is. You walk in with the mentality that you're the sage on the stage, and everybody is going to be so impressed with how much you know.
Right. We teach the what we call humbly the platinum rule of presentations, where the presentation design is a function of your audience, your purpose, and your setting. And notice you aren't in there at all. Your audience, your purpose, and your setting. And that is the very first thing we teach. And then from there, we expand the rest of how do we think about creating presentations. So I'm right there with you. It's not about you. You just happen to be the one delivering the message.
Is everything okay in your world, Justin? Because I heard the siren and I could hear my kids outside, and I'm like, "What did they do? What did
Oh,
they do?"
I'm here in Baker Heights on Lee Road, and we have luckily we have a police station just a mile down the road, but sometimes they like to go zipping by.
Yeah.
And so everything is fine here in my world. It's a little rainy, so I hope people are being safe.
Yeah, yeah. Alright, cool, cool. So, well, I guess what I wanna know is, you've got the book out, you got the presentation out. What do you do in between going to the training conference and writing books? Are you working in consulting? You just, go fishing? What's going on in your world then?
Man, I wish. I mean, I'm getting paid nothing for Training Magazine, and I'll tell you what, writing a book was one of the most fulfilling experiences I've had. But I anybody who makes a living as an author, my hat goes off to them. That is a tough life, and it is a tricky way. Most business books sell at most five to around 2 to 5,000 copies. And so you're not getting a ton of money from books. So what do? I spend most of my time being an executive communication coach where I'm doing one-on-one coaching with executives, sometimes startup founders, new executives launching their career. Got some more sirens going by. Sorry about that.
No worries, I don't blame you.
um, and then also corporate training. So when I was at Capital One, I had the good luck and also the interest to develop training skills. And at Capital One, if it was important, they wanted their internal leaders to do the training. And so the day long communication class on how to do presentations that was developed by my partner, John Polk. I taught it for 5 years. There was a group of about 10 people who were all internal Capital One people who were the trainers. We've taught the class to over 10,000 people. Probably I haven't done the math recently. It's probably closer to 15,000 people at this point. So in between the conferences, social media, books, which none of that makes me any money. I do coaching, which I love, I'm passionate about, and I also do corporate training. And
What do you love about the coaching so much? Not that I think it's a bad thing. I'm just trying to figure out why that's like your drug. What do you love about that?
because the change happens so fast. Almost every conversation I have with somebody, they have a epiphany in the conversation where they suddenly see themselves differently, more the way, usually more the way the audience sees them, and they suddenly realize, wait, the way I've been giving feedback to people, it's not effective. I I thought I felt good because I was getting it off my chest, but I never checked to see if the person I wanted to give feedback to was able to ready to receive it in a way that would cause change. And if I'm giving feedback without causing change, I'm like, what am I doing? And so, every time there's an epiphany like that, I would say almost every conversation, not every conversation, but, and boy, that is my drug of choice. And so,
Yeah, those aha moments are something special, aren't they?
yeah,
I like to I like having them. I call them put your book down moments, like
mhm,
when you're reading and you're like, "Ah," and something just hits, and I gotta put my book down and be like, "Why didn't I get that before?"
right.
And when you as a trainer can communicate that, there's a bit of self-satisfaction. You're like, "Okay, I did my job," but then there's also the fact that you're watching them get it, and you're like, they're going to be better after this.
Right.
And,
Right.
and then, yeah,
Well,
that is such a good feeling.
and then I usually meet with them 2 weeks later and I say, "Okay, what have you changed?" And almost always they've changed something. They've done something differently. And you get that a little bit with corporate training, where you can see the 40 to 100 people in the room and you can see the light goes on and the light shining in their eyes. You don't necessarily always get a lot of feedback later about how it changed their lives, which you do with coaching. And the other thing I love about working with individuals is you'll definitely see a change, right? You can they're going to take that information and they're going to do something differently with it. And sometimes if you're working with a large corporation, you're saying, "Okay, I hope this is going to have an impact," but there's a lot of inertia with large corporations, and to really get the change, it shouldn't just be training. It should be training and coaching and a cohort model and self coaching and all these things so that they're still thinking about it 6 months later. Cause, too often the training's great. It was a fun event. And then the next Monday comes along and everybody goes back to businesses the way they used to do it. And so, boy, the coaching is what I think makes it sticky. It makes it come up again 3 months later, 6 months later.
All right. Well, we've got a few minutes left. We've talked about the success model with a four-part framework. Are there any last minute tips that, as a communications expert, you'd tell our audience?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the 3 F's framework. And we try to track back everything we do to science. We'll call it science with a lowercase s, right? This isn't particle physics, not fundamentals, but it is science, meaning somebody did some testing and they saw an effect. And so here's the simplest thing if you want to be a better communicator. Before your next big meeting, before your next podcast, take 1 minute and write down one sentence about the goal you have in that meeting. That has been proven that it will make you be happier with the end result of that conversation than if you hadn't taken the minute to write down your goal. So that's all it takes. 1 minute, write down your goal. You do have to write it down. You can't just think it in your head. You have to write it down on a piece of paper. I'm going to expand that a little bit to the 3F framework, which is what we teach. Instead of taking 1 minute, take 3 minutes. Write down the 3 facts that you want the person to remember as part of your audience to remember. Write down the feelings you have and the audience has going into the conversations, right? It's all about emotion. And write down the follow ups. What do you promise to do after the conversation? And what do you want your audience to promise to do? And if you take 3 minutes and do that, you will have twice the leadership presence that you had before. You will come across as clear and concise, and it's only taking you 3 minutes. That is the easiest level up people could do to their communications.
That is good stuff. I like that. I will make sure that I get that in the show notes as well. So I'm sure people are going to want to get in touch with you. Where can they reach you?
I think LinkedIn is probably the easiest place. Justin Hunsaker, I'm the executive communication coach. There are a couple Justin Hunsakers out there, but only one of them will have a big book on there behind them in the background. That's probably the easiest way to reach out to me. I can also give you my email address and some other ways people can get a hold of me, and you can put it in the show notes. So if people want to reach out, I will say I love talking to anybody who's a trainer, anybody who's a learning professional. We can swap war stories. We can talk about tips and tricks, but anything that will help me get better and anything that will help you get better. So I'll just put it out to your audience. I'd love to be in touch.
Fantastic. Justin, thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Dwayne, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.